Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
So we are back today with the last prompt number 7 in the first section of our guided journal. The first section is Inspire. And last week we talked about joy, and it really resonated with me. And I just want to highlight from last week, L Shawn mentioned, make a list of the top 10 things that bring you joy or something. And so I did that exercise. I sat down for a very brief moment, and I actually ended up with 31 and thought I would only be at the beginning of doing the exercise that I'd only get to 5. So it's like once I settled into the exercise, it just all started flowing. So that was a kind of lesson to maybe carry forward into this prompt too. How can you, settle into an exercise when it feels like things aren't flowing, and let that kind of, and let your patience guide your response. And so now moving into number 7, here is the prompt. How do you lean into authenticity amidst the fear? You will not let go of fear, but you can grow with fear. Imagine you are at a dinner with authenticity, fear, and growth. They have been your friends and teachers since birth. At the dinner, a beautiful box is placed on the table, and you open it to reveal a piece of paper with the above questions written on it. Play with these topics. What do the 4, you, authenticity, fear, and growth show you? I love this prompt as far as having this idea, this beautiful box placed there, and then being able to open that to see the gifts and challenges of the 4, which is yourself, authenticity, fear, and growth. So I like this idea too, starting at the beginning of the prompt. And I guess I'll just start from the beginning here is, we won't fully let go of fear, and fear is part of our response. It has been throughout time. So it's it's a way of thinking about how do we engage fear rather than think we have to stamp it out of us. I know with fear, it can take hold and I can automatically go to, I need to stop this. I can't let fear take hold here. It's, very black and white and goes to the solutions right away. Like, how do I get fear out of that thing? I think there's a much softer and gentler approach for me to start using more frequently. And that is allowing the fear and naming the fear and feeling that fear throughout my body, but also making a friend of it. What is it trying to tell me? Instead of me trying to automatically fix it, what would it look like if it wasn't fixed? How would I then use it as a tool? So that is really resonating with me, because when we are in fear, we often freeze. And I feel like that is definitely or fawn, I would say, but definitely a response that is protective and necessary a lot of the times. But when I think of engaging fear as this kind of animated thing, something that I can see in this box, something that I can touch and feel and just discover with curiosity, I am breathing less heavy thinking about it that way right now. So that's where my brain kind of just started going with this prompt in terms of how I want to engage fear, how I typically have engaged fear, and how I can continue to engage fear differently over time. It's not a one and done shift in my being. So L Shawn, with this prompt, I know we start a lot around the fear concept. What resonated with you?
Very similar to what you said, Eryn, about what is the way to approach fear? How do you allow fear to be there and also be able to show up authentically? And one thing that comes to mind is just the dinner analogy. Like, imagine that you're at dinner with authenticity, fear, and growth. And if we are to anthropomorphize these concepts, like authenticity is there, fear, and growth, and I'm imagining what they look like. So I'm thinking, I'm sitting at this beautiful table in this beautiful dining room, And we have this box and the question, how do you lean into authenticity amidst the fear? And I'm thinking like what authenticity, fear, and growth would say, like how they would advise me or how they would engage in this conversation. And one thing that I'm thinking about is like, what would fear say if fear got this question, or if I asked fear this question, how do I lean into authenticity amidst the fear, the fear that's there? And going to what you asked, Eryn, about what if this isn't fixed, and then how can I use this as a tool, or how can I use this as a way to navigate life. And one thing that I was thinking about is like, what would fear say to me if I were to ask fear, what can I learn from you? I would probably ask fear that. And then I'm imagining that fear would say something along the lines of, it's information when something is perceived as a threat, and I would say a threat or a risk. Fear shows up to raise awareness of that. Like, this is something that I perceive as a risk. So then I'm able to, I think that's one way of naming fear. Like, why is fear here? What is this risk, or what is this threat that I perceive? And is this necessarily a risk or a threat? Or is it just my response, or my reacting to something that happened in the past that was similar to what I'm facing now? And then there's the question of going to growth. So that makes me want to like lean into growth, and maybe turn to growth and say, so growth, what do you think? Because if there's fear here, it's information, it's a signal that there's something in the situation, either the perceived outcome or the imagined outcome, I should say, and something that is causing hesitation or causing discomfort for me to move forward, but there's the fear there. And so with fear there, I would be like, okay, so growth, what would you suggest I do as I walk with fear in this situation? I imagine that growth would say something along the lines of, here's what you have. Here are the tools that you have available. This is what we know. This is what we know. This is familiar to a situation that happened. Understand that you have tools that you didn't have in the past, and here's what we know about the situation. So that's kind of where I would see growth coming in. And as far as authenticity, I think authenticity would be one thing that comes to mind is authenticity would probably be really amused. I don't know why I think this, but I could just imagine authenticity is this very wise, content being that finds the whole thing amusing and just says, you probably you acknowledging, or you walking with fear in this situation and doing what you are called to do or you're compelled to do is authentic. I could just see authenticity saying something along those lines, being true to what you are experiencing and being aware and acknowledging what is happening in the situation, that really recognizing that you have hesitancy, that you are reluctant to do something because you believe the outcome will be negative. And going into the situation, or going into the task or the endeavor, or fear often comes up when you're doing something new or unfamiliar. It also comes up when you're not sure what the outcome is going to be. So those are some things that I was thinking about, like what would these concepts look like if I was having dinner with them? And what would they say? Eryn, what's coming up for you?
Yeah. Two things that you said stood out to me. One, when you started talking about authenticity, having a wise approach and might find amusement. And then the other I want to speak to more is how you contextualize growth as, what do I already have in my toolbox, really, that I've learned from growing in the past. And so
Mhm.
thinking about like how I have tools now, right? And I'm not the same person I was a week ago or 5 years ago. And yet, when I think of a similar fear situation that I'm having to navigate, it is often going back to that 5 years ago feeling I'm navigating at that level, not realizing that I've had not only 5 years of growth, but even if it's something as recent as 24 hours of growth. I think that embodies the concept of grace and giving ourselves grace and also sharing that with others to just share the message of you're not the same person you were, and you have this component within you just as much as the fear. You also have growth. And so that really stood out to me as like, okay, there are new skills that I have right here and now that came from growth over the past. So using those and tapping into those as a way to engage my authenticity, as a way to engage fear, that really stood out to me. And then kind of thinking about as we were talking about this at the table, it's like, which one had the loudest voice in my head? And it was fear. It wasn't authenticity. It wasn't growth. And the funny thing was, it wasn't me. Like this prompt asked people to
Mm-hmm.
first play with these topics from you, like, and then there's these other characteristics. And so I think that's interesting as a visual that shows like when we are in fear, that can take over authenticity. It can take over growth, but at the root of it all, it can take over our whole being, me as a person, me as an individual in this world. So that really stood out as well. And so I have these resources at the table. I have myself, I have growth, I have fear as a resource, and I have authenticity as a resource. So now, as they continue to compete at the table, I am hoping that eventually I get to a point where fear isn't the loudest voice at the table and there's more of a rhythm in conversation. And so I see this as that a conversation between ourselves and authenticity, fear, and growth. And when I picture that at the table of me sitting there with these other people represented by authenticity and fear and growth, I can have a conversation that is maybe a little bit gentler, a little bit more insightful and curious about these people sitting around the table with me. So, maybe it's not even about calling them people. Maybe it's I'm at the table with different animals, or I'm at the table with different characters or different superheroes, or I don't know, something to really help personify these elements and give myself more equilibrium in addressing them as rather than this nebulous word of fear or this nebulous word of growth. And so that really stood out to me what you were talking about. And then also the idea of a gift in all of this. The box is placed at the middle of the table and a piece of paper is in the box with the above questions written on it. So the questions would be, how do you lean into authenticity amidst fear? And then just the exercise of imagining yourself at dinner. Just journaling on that prompt alone, I think could give some real insight into what that process is like and the meaning making that happens, but also how that feels as you write or as one writes about these topics or these, I guess you'd say they're all different kind of things, right? So topics might be a good catch-all. Like there's an emotion word, there's a verb, like is authenticity a noun, right? I don't know. But
Yeah, that's a noun.
anyway, yeah. Yeah. So they're all different parts of speech too, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And I don't know if we were fully intentional in that, but it makes sense, right? That one is a noun and then the fear and growth are different. But authenticity to me is always kind of the one at the table that should always be there. But then when the fear shows up, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, whoa, I'm moving all the way over here because nobody is going to like what they see. Like it's like this big thing, which reminds me of family constellations, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if this was a family constellation scenario and authenticity is out in the field and then suddenly fear is placed out there, I'm like backing away, right? My
Mm-hmm.
authenticity is goes into hiding, or it's like
Mm-hmm.
I have to be something different. And so something I've been working on a lot because a lot of how I grew up was very much having to perform, right? Like getting straight A's, doing music really well, doing all these certain things that mattered above the person rather than like, who am I? Do I even know who I am? And like those questions. So this topic would have been really helpful too, right? In high school or college even. And so I think I don't know where I was headed with that, except just that I think I'm done talking and I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, there's so many things that came up as you were talking. One was the idea of animals instead of people, because I was imagining these like ethereal beings that were representing these different concepts. And rather than embodying the different concepts, they were kind of, I don't know, removed from that emotional reaction that one might have when they're in fear, authenticity, and growth. And so when you talked about animals being there, it shifted my perspective of it, and it kind of grounded it more into a like a visceral, more emotional reaction, or more reactionary. So like when I thought about an animal for fear, I imagined this like burrowing or scurrying animal, maybe like a rabbit or a squirrel or something that's like constantly moving and like, hiding and looking around and, hyper vigilant. And then I imagine like authenticity as a bird, or like a swan or a heron, like, those really graceful, peaceful birds. Like I rarely ever imagine a swan as really hyper vigilant. I imagine a swan gliding along the water. Of course, what you don't see is its feet moving beneath the water, but it's just kind of gliding, and it's not, I don't really imagine a swan having any urgency to it. And then I imagine growth being, I don't know why, but the thing that comes to mind is elephant. I don't know why. Just this elephant, just, hanging out. Um, and I don't know why I'm imagining an elephant for growth. I don't know. Just that's what's kind of popped up in my head. And then you brought in family constellations, which was interesting because, being in a certification course right now, I'm thinking about the field and how a facilitator might do that. And I think since authenticity and fear, there seems to be like, I wouldn't say they're like polar opposites or that they're dichotomized, but they are the two players. So let's say two players in the question, which is how do you lean into authenticity amidst the fear? And so what I was thinking is maybe having, like, you would have the seeker rep. So you'd have the person, the you in this would be the seeker rep, would be there. And then maybe fear, I would probably, if I were the facilitator, let me just think about it. Yeah, I would put the rep, the seeker rep. So the seeker is the you in this. So those of you who don't know anything about family constellations, so I would put the seeker rep in, and then I would put fear up. And I would most likely ask fear, you know, how they feel. That's usually the first question that you ask the rep of fear. And I probably ask the seeker rep how they feel as well, because you need to know like how the seeker rep, which is the you in this, is feeling, and play from there. And then based on what the seeker rep says, like for example, if the seeker rep was in the field, I would say, how are you? And if the seeker rep is like, my heart's racing and I want to hide, then I would most likely bring in a support for the seeker rep. So like, and who would the support be? So I'm just thinking about that in terms of like family constellations, because family constellations, there's a lot that can be revealed in the field, and it's based on what the you in the question, the seeker rep would how the seeker rep is feeling in the field, and then you want to make sure that you're taking care of the different reps, especially the seeker rep. And that kind of dictates how things play out. So that would be really interesting to do in family constellations, to have like you and fear in the field and see what happens, see what is revealed. So those are some interesting ideas that you brought up in in what you were saying about this prompt. And I think there's just so much. There's like, I love that instead of this being like a series of questions, and that's, one thing like you find when you, and this is kind of like more metacognitive, or we're looking at the prompt from, you know, the writer of the prompt, just like there's only one question, there's not, there's only one topic, like that kind of thing. But I think it's really a great opportunity to use your imagination and to change your perspective of these, including yourself, for things. So you have yourself, authenticity, fear, and growth, and you can play with them. Like one thing you could do in the journal is maybe even do a dialogue. Like you could start out with the dialogues. You start out with yourself saying, "Oh, we have this box. I'm opening the box. The question is, how do you lean into authenticity amidst the fear?" And then you could even like you come up with, like you were saying, Eryn, fear was loud and taking up a lot of space in your image of this dinner. And so that's another thing that's really interesting, all these different players and how they interact with each other. That was another very interesting thought and image that popped up when you were talking about fear as being louder. And so that would be really interesting to see how the concepts interact as they are anthropomorphized and personified. Like fear could be like really boisterous, or fear could be really wanting to pull everyone into a state of heightened awareness, or heightened like hypervigilance. Like who knows? Like how would fear interact with authenticity? How would authenticity interact with fear, and so on? Growth and yourself. Like where are you in this? Like for me, I was this person who was just taking in the wisdom of these three beings that were representing a more like kind of esoteric, ethereal being. But then when they're animals, I just imagine being in a room with these different animals and trying to figure out how each one is revealing how I feel about them in their actions. So there's so much there. Anything coming up for you, Eryn?
Yes. So through while you were talking a couple minutes ago, I wrote down this question that came to my head. It was like a download from somewhere else, but it was like, well, what's the funniest thing each would say or do? And that could be a fun way to relate to this as well. So, like, is what's the swan doing over there that's really funny? Or what am I doing that's really bizarre? And being
Yeah.
able to kind of add a little bit of humor in there, because I think that humor then can be a tool as well, to then use and see, oh, this wasn't as scary as I thought it would be, or oh wow, I have grown a lot, and I still have a long ways to go with this, because here is how I'm acting in this situation, and I'm just gonna laugh at myself right now, like those types of things. So that's one of the things that came to me too, is where is the humor in all of this through what is said and then what is done as well. And then I could feel like as you were really thinking about family constellations and how this applies, I could see going back to growth, your growth, right? Moving
Hmm.
beyond being a participant to now knowing how to engage the field yourself, and with a specific prompt, or what to enter into the conversation first or not, or like I definitely see that growth within you too. So like if you're sitting at this table and you're naming all the different areas of your growth, I could see how that one might get overlooked. Oh, so just wanted to highlight that too, because that's really cool. And what a gift, right? To be able to facilitate and do that beyond being a participant. So that showed up for me as well. And then just through the like laughter of this all, and maybe, I don't know, as I was thinking about the humor, it like kind of also became, this isn't a dinner where we are just sitting. Turns into like a dance party, and through, because movement, and even like the bilateral aspect of movement, which is a big term right now because it's been used in EMDR, just this the concept of bilateral, and it's used in a lot of different other healing therapies, and really the point when we think about movement is you are walking or running or dancing, right? And so I saw in my own mind the imagery of these animals and me like having a dance party that was quite liberating in some way too. So curious how I can embody that feeling in the moment when I do have that fear take hold, because I want to say, oh, okay, let's go back to this situation. I know there's going to be a lot of fear with it. And I'm going to really try to feel back into that dance party. But on the other end of it, it's like fear is just like gripping me and like making me feel so paralyzed or scared or, so it's a process. So that's the question then that I have. I think this journal prompt is a really good jumping off point for people to consider their authenticity, fear, and growth. But how is that then internalized over time? And I think I want to highlight the importance of this journal as one way that it is. And this is just free flowing right now. This just came to me too. Like, okay, we're wrapping up this first series or the first journal prompt of Inspire with the 7 prompts within it, or sorry, first journal theme with the 7 prompts inside of it, and now moving into exploration. And so, as I think of like the liberating feeling of really digging into this dinner scene, I think that highlights the intentionality that we have behind this journal to create the movement to then move into exploration. I do believe, and I know it's easy to forget all of our process, but I know we had part of our process where it was like, okay, what is the order of these prompts within each category or each theme? And then on top of that, what is the order of each theme? Like I know we had those conversations and I just completely forgot about them until I started talking about them. And I'm like, oh wow, there's a reason this is the last prompt in Inspire. It gives journalers and listeners tools to be able to move into exploration a little bit more easily and a little bit more freely. So that came up too.
That's a great insight because one thing I was thinking about this prompt that's a little different from the other prompts is it's more like, explore. So you're imagining something. And I love that you brought in the idea of motion and movement and the idea of a dance. And it's not just sitting down at a table, but it's dancing. And I was thinking about how that's another expression of these concepts is how would authenticity move and how would growth move and what would fear look like if you put it into motion. If you were to do an interpretive dance of these, and what would your natural movement be? Like, how would it feel? Like, how would you feel? Like, would you rock? Would your arms be moving up and down? Like, how would you move if you were just moving? And then, like, if you were to create some kind of a choreographed or harmonious movement with all of these different, like authenticity, fear, growth, what would that look like? And how would you adjust, to mirror each other or to move in a harmonious way? And I wonder what it would be like if you were like in a room and there was one person who was like moving like authenticity and another person was moving like growth and another person was moving like fear. Like, what would that look like? I imagine that fear would be like, I don't know. I just always think like frenetic, I don't know, like moving
Yeah,
really
it's funny.
fast.
And I feel like rigid, like
Oh, rigid. Okay, rigid too. Rigid too. I can see that too, like some rigidity in the way that fear moves. But yeah, that would be something that would be fun to try going back to your wanting to insert humor into it. Like what would that look like? And then maybe even just embody those different, for example, if you were to just move the way that you would normally move and then switch and move like you would imagine authenticity moves. Like is it fluid? Is it, how would that interpretive dance look? And to kind of embody those different movements to feel what that's like in your body. And then also it will give you some information about how you feel about these concepts. Like Eryn, when you said that fear would most likely be really rigid. And I was seeing fear as being very frenetic and being very all just moving in jerks and then maybe crouching down and then like scurrying away. And this goes back to my image of like a squirrel or
Yeah.
like a rodent or some kind of small animal that needs to move, and their ears are always twitching, and they're never able to stay still in one place unless, of course, they feel like they're in danger. And even if they are in danger, there's this sense of their muscles and their whole body just being poised to jump or to move fast once they get the opportunity to do so, or once it gets so like to be too much to hold still that you just have to move. So that's something that I was thinking about in terms of how fear would move. So it's really interesting to imagine the interpretive dance of these different concepts, and it's going to show up differently for everyone.
Yes. I love that you highlighted that. And it's interesting with that difference because when you talked about the squirrel at the table early on, when you said like that frenetic energy, that resonated with me earlier on in the conversation because I was like, oh, that is also how fear shows up, right? Like, whereas
Mhm.
I was thinking about fear a little bit differently and how it shows up for me, but I was like, okay,
Mhm.
I missed a piece there that I really needed. I needed that language to then, okay, fear is that way for me, that frenetic energy. And now that I know that a little bit more visually, I have a better understanding of it rather than just knowing that cerebrally or like, so I really appreciated that. So that might be a segue into, I don't know, our call to action. And
Mhm.
so I guess on my end for a call to action for this last prompt, I encourage you to look back through all of the first prompts within this. I keep calling it a theme or a category or a section within Inspire and summarize what stood out to you, what meaning making you have through these first seven, and how that might relate to where you're at right now.
I like that. My call to action would be similar to what Eryn said, going through the section, Inspire section, and doing a review, a reflection. And I would encourage you to look at it differently, play around with these prompts, and maybe see what new comes up for you. But also, you could take these prompts as you go through Inspire and just imagine all seven of these prompts at a table. Or at a dinner
Oh, cool. Yeah.
party. They're all at a dinner party or they're all at a garden party because we're in spring here. And so there's garden parties are often, something that people do at this time of year. Think about it that way. Think about these prompts as personified or anthropomorphized beings that you are interacting with. How would you interact with them? And what would they say to you? Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Mayshell's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.